Nothing was happening. That's how I knew everything already had. Before I go any further, if you listen to stories like this all the way through, stories about quiet moments that change everything, take a second to subscribe. It helps this channel keep telling the kind of stories people usually don't say out loud. I came home early on a Thursday, not because I was suspicious, not because I was checking on her. My last meeting was canceled, and for once traffic moved like it was on my side. I remember thinking it might be nice to surprise her. Flowers were still open on the corner, so I grabbed a small bundle without much thought. Nothing dramatic. Just something normal husbands do when they have an unexpected free hour. The house was quiet when I walked in. Not the heavy, secretive kind of quiet. Just settled. The lights were on. Her shoes were by the door, neatly placed, toes pointing out like they always were. I called her name once casually, the way you do when you expect an answer from somewhere down the hall. Madison answered immediately. Too immediately. "Hey," she said from the kitchen, not surprised, not annoyed, just neutral. I stepped inside and felt it before I saw anything else. The air didn't shift when I entered. There was no pause, no adjustment, no moment where the room had to make space for me. It was like I'd walked into a place that was already complete. She was at the counter chopping vegetables. There was music playing softly from her phone. Something unfamiliar. She glanced at me, smiled, and went right back to what she was doing. "You're home early," she said. "Yeah," I replied. "Thought I'd beat traffic." "That's nice," she said. And that was it. No follow-up, no question. I stood there holding the flowers like an idiot, waiting for something to happen, for her to turn around fully, for her to comment on them, for her body language to change in any noticeable way. Didn't. I set the flowers down on the counter. She glanced at them briefly, nodded once, and shifted them aside so she could keep working. Not rudely, efficiently. Something about that small motion lodged in my chest. I watched her for a moment longer than necessary. She moved comfortably, confidently, like someone who knew exactly how much space she was allowed to take up, like someone who wasn't anticipating interruption. "How was your day?" I asked. "Fine," she said. "Productive." She didn't ask about mine. I moved around the kitchen, opening the fridge, closing it again without taking anything. The magnet with our vacation photo from 2 summers ago was still there. Everything looked the same. That was the problem. Usually when I came home, even quietly, there was a subtle recalibration. A glance, a breath, some unspoken acknowledgement that the dynamic had shifted. 2 people in a space instead of 1. This time, nothing recalibrated. I sat at the table and watched her cook. She didn't tell me about anything. She didn't complain. She didn't fill the silence the way she used to. She seemed finished, like her day was already complete and I was just a late detail. At one point, she checked her phone. Not nervously, casually. She read something, smiled to herself, then locked the screen and slid it face down on the counter. The smile lingered a fraction too long. I noticed then that there was an extra glass by the sink. "Rinsed," said upside down, not hidden, not explained. "Did we have company?" I asked lightly. She didn't look up. "Earlier," she said, "from work." "Oh," I said. "How long were they here?" "Not long." That answer landed oddly flat. Not defensive, not careful, just closed. I realized I was asking questions out of habit, not because I expected real answers. Dinner was quiet, not tense, just empty. She ate like someone who'd already shared the important parts of her day elsewhere. When she finished, she stood up, gathered her plate, and paused. "I'm going to take a shower," she said. "You good?" I nodded. "Yeah." She leaned down and kissed the top of my head. Polite kiss. Practiced one, the kind you give a relative at a gathering. When she walked away, I stayed seated, staring at the faint ring left by the extra glass on the counter. It struck me then with unsettling clarity that I hadn't interrupted anything. I hadn't caught her. I had arrived after I was no longer required. And the worst part was this. The house didn't feel like it was hiding something from me. Felt like it had already moved on. That night, I didn't sleep. Not because I was panicking or replaying obvious evidence in my head. There was nothing concrete to replay obvious evidence in my head. There was nothing concrete to replay. No images burned into my mind. No voices. No sounds behind closed doors. Just a feeling that wouldn't settle, like my body had understood something my brain was still refusing to name. Madison came to bed later than usual. I pretended to be asleep not out of strategy, out of instinct. I didn't want to meet her eyes in the dark. I didn't want to confirm whether that calm distance I felt in the kitchen followed her here, too. She slid under the covers quietly, facing away from me. Her phone buzzed once on the nightstand. She didn't reach for it. Neither did I. The silence between us felt arranged, like furniture that had already been placed long before I walked into the room. In the morning, everything looked normal again. That was almost worse. Madison made coffee. She hummed softly. She asked if I wanted eggs. Her voice was warm, familiar, technically perfect. If someone had walked in, they would have seen a couple moving through a routine they practiced for years. But I noticed the timing, the precision. She poured her coffee before mine. Not selfishly, automatically, like she was used to thinking of herself first. Now, when she handed me my mug, it felt like an afterthought that had been remembered just in time. I went to work and tried to focus. I stared at emails without reading them. Every few minutes, my mind drifted back to that extra glass by the sink. Not the glass itself, but how little it seemed to matter to her that I'd seen it. At lunch, I realized something unsettling. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even scared. I felt obsolete, like a piece of furniture no one thought to throw away because it still technically served a purpose. When I got home that evening, Madison wasn't there yet. Her car was gone. The house felt lighter without her, which sent a sharp, guilty thought through me. I sat on the couch and tried to remember the last time I'd been the person she talked to first. Not complained to, not coordinated with, actually talked to. I couldn't pinpoint it. She arrived an hour later, relaxed, energized. She told me she'd grabbed dinner with coworkers. She described the restaurant in detail. The lighting, the dessert, she didn't mention names. I didn't ask. That night she laughed at something on her phone while brushing her teeth. I heard it through the bathroom door. The quiet laugh, the kind that slips out when you forget you're not alone. When she came out, she caught me looking at her. "What?" she asked, smiling. "Nothing," I said. And that was true. There was nothing I could accuse, nothing I could confront, no line she'd crossed that I could clearly point to, but the distance grew louder over the next few days. Madison stopped asking where I was going. She stopped checking in. Our conversations became logistical, efficient, stripped of curiosity. When I spoke, she listened politely, the way you listen to someone whose story doesn't affect your decisions anymore. One evening, I mentioned a memory from early in our marriage, a trip we'd taken, a moment that had once meant something to both of us. She smiled. "Oh yeah," she said. "That was fun. Past tense, sealed, archived." Later that night, lying beside her again, I finally understood what had shifted. Affairs, at least the way people imagine them, are chaotic, full of risk and urgency and secrecy. This wasn't that. This was quiet, organized, emotionally resolved. Whatever line she had crossed, she hadn't crossed it recently. She'd crossed it long enough ago that she no longer felt the need to watch her steps around me. I wasn't being deceived in real time. I was being managed. And somewhere between the extra glass, the casual kisses, and the way she lived her days without needing to include me, I realized something that left a hollow ache in my chest. Madison hadn't replaced me yet, but she had already made room for my absence. By the end of that week, I stopped looking for proof. That decision didn't come from strength or clarity. It came from exhaustion. I realized that every time I mentally leaned forward trying to catch something concrete, I felt smaller. Like I was shrinking myself to fit into a space she'd already measured and decided I no longer filled. So I leaned back instead. I began to observe the way you do when you already know the ending of a story, but still have to sit through the remaining chapters. Calm, detached, quietly attentive. Madison noticed the change almost immediately. "You're very quiet lately," she said one night as we stood on opposite sides of the kitchen island. "Everything okay?" I looked at her then, really looked. Her face was relaxed. Her eyes were steady. This wasn't guilt. This was someone checking whether a system was still functioning. "Yeah," I said, "just tired." She accepted that answer too easily. The next morning, she left earlier than usual. I watched from the window as she backed out of the driveway without looking back at the house. I tried to remember the last time she'd waved. the memory didn't surface. I started noticing patterns I hadn't wanted to name before. The way she dressed differently on certain days, not better, just intentional. The way she carried herself when she left, as if she were stepping into a version of herself that didn't exist here anymore. One afternoon, I came home to find the guest towels had been replaced. New ones, folded neatly. Ours, the ones we'd used for years, were gone. "Why the new towels?" I asked, holding one up. She shrugged. "The old ones were worn out." "They were fine," I said. "They were old," she corrected, not unkindly. That word again. "Old," she corrected, not unkindly. Like something that had served its purpose. I realized then how carefully she'd been preparing the environment, not hiding, curating, removing traces of things that belonged to a version of her life she no longer occupied. A few days later, Madison mentioned casually that a colleague might be moving to another department soon. She didn't look at me when she said it, just stated it like weather. "Is that a good thing?" I asked. "Probably," she said. "Changes happen." I nodded. But inside something settled heavily. This wasn't just about another person. This was about her rehearsing language, practicing indifference, making transitions sound reasonable. That night, she reached for me in bed. Not urgently, not with hunger, just habit. Her hand rested on my arm, light, almost polite. I didn't move. Madison froze slightly, then withdrew her hand as if she'd touched something warm by mistake. "You okay?" she asked quietly. "Yeah," I said again. This time, she didn't answer right away. I felt her turn away, the mattress shifting between us. That space felt deliberate now, measured. The next day, I ran into an old friend after work, someone who'd known us as a couple for years. He asked how we were doing. I opened my mouth and almost said, "Good." The word stuck. "Fine," I said instead. "On the drive home," I said instead. On the drive home, I understood why it felt wrong. Good implies movement together. Fine means nothing is actively broken yet. When I walked into the house that evening, Madison was on the phone laughing softly. She ended the call when she saw me, her expression smoothing out. Neutral again. "Everything okay?" I asked, echoing her question from earlier in the week. "Yeah," she said, "just talking." I nodded. That was the moment it fully clicked. She wasn't lying to me. Not exactly. She was telling me only what no longer mattered. There's a particular loneliness that comes from realizing you are no longer the audience for someone's real life. You still sit in the same room, you share the same bed, but the important conversations are happening elsewhere. That night, as I lay awake beside her, breathing steady and untroubled, I finally admitted something to myself. Madison had already left. Not physically, not legally, but emotionally, decisively, and with enough time behind her that she no longer felt the need to rush. I wasn't waiting for a confession. I was waiting for a formality. And for the first time since that early Thursday afternoon, I felt strangely calm because when you understand that you're already a guest in your own marriage, you stop worrying about being asked to leave. The conversation happened on a Sunday afternoon, which felt appropriate in a way I didn't understand until later. Sundays were when we used to reset, groceries, laundry, plans. The quiet agreement that whatever had been messy during the week could be smoothed out before Monday. That day, there was nothing left to reset. Madison was sitting at the dining table with her laptop open, scrolling through something that didn't seem to require much attention. When I walked in, she closed it without urgency. No hiding, no guilt, just courtesy. "Can we talk?" she asked. I nodded and sat across from her. I noticed she'd chosen that seat on purpose, the one that gave her the clearest path to the hallway if she needed it. That small detail told me more than any words could have. "I've been thinking," she said carefully, "about us, about where we are." I waited, not because I was bracing myself, but because I already knew the shape of what was coming, the tone, the phrasing, the gentle slope toward inevitability. She talked about feeling disconnected, about growth, about how people change. She said there was no one thing I'd done wrong. She said that several times actually, like it was an important point she wanted on record. I listened without interrupting, not out of politeness, but because there was nothing left to defend. You don't argue with someone who has already finished the emotional work of leaving. You'd only be arguing with the echo. When she paused, she looked at me expectantly. I realized she was waiting for reassurance, not reconciliation. Permission. "I know," I said. Just those two words. Her shoulders dropped slightly, like she'd been carrying a weight she hadn't wanted to name. Relief crossed her face before she could stop it. "You do?" she asked. "Yes," I said. "I've known for a while." She didn't ask how. She didn't ask what I meant by that. She simply nodded, as if my awareness simplified things. "I don't want this to be ugly," she said. "I want us to handle this like adults." I almost smiled, not out of bitterness, out of clarity. Madison wasn't afraid of hurting me. She was afraid of inconvenience, of disruption, of friction. "We can," I said. "I won't make it difficult." That was the moment I saw it clearly. The reason she'd been so calm, so organized, so settled, she hadn't been waiting to decide. She'd been waiting to decide. She'd been waiting for me to catch up. We talked logistics, calmly, respectfully, like two people closing a shared account. There were no tears, no raised voices, no dramatic confessions. She didn't even say his name, and I didn't ask. It didn't matter because the betrayal hadn't been a single act. It had been a process, a quiet one, careful one that removed me piece by piece until there was nothing left to betray. That night, I slept better than I had in weeks. In the days that followed, something unexpected happened. The house felt lighter, not happier, honest. I moved through it without trying to anticipate her moods or interpret her silences. I stopped performing my role in a marriage that no longer existed. When I packed my things, Madison stood in the doorway and watched. She thanked me for being understanding. I nodded and carried the last box to my car. As I drove away, I realized something that surprised me. I didn't feel abandoned. I felt returned to myself, because the worst part of what happened wasn't that she chose someone else. It was that she'd stopped choosing me long before I was given a chance to notice. And that's the truth I want to leave you with. The deepest betrayal isn't always found in secret messages or late nights. Sometimes it's found in how little space someone leaves for you in a life you're still technically part of. When you walk into a room and nothing adjusts for your presence, that's not peace. That's absence. If this story resonated with you, if you've ever felt like a guest in a place that was supposed to be yours, consider subscribing. These stories aren't about drama. They're about clarity. And sometimes clarity is the beginning of freedom.